Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Four Persons. I'm John Benko, the founder. Our special guest today is Kyle Whittington. Kyle, how you doing today?
Oh, living the dream. You know how it is.
So I'm really interested in this particular program. Our apostolate is only a few years um, experiencing, rapid growth right now in terms of at least our visibility and everything. But we are interested in getting to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that that's what you kind of help Catholic apostolates grow using the new modern technology and everything. So why don't we start there? Give us a broad view of exactly what it is that you offer and how you help groups like ours.
Sure. So I guess helping apostolates is kind of just an expansion from our core mission, which was kind of happened by accident last year with the Catholic Creator Conference. I just had this idea. Well, okay, I'll just start from the very beginning. It kind of all started with the Pints with Aquinas debate between Trent Horn and Dr. Gavin Ortland on Sola Scriptura. It was a live event that was open to the public, and a whole bunch of people came. So me, Swan Sona, Braden Cook, who runs the channel, the Catechumen, Derek Cummins, a lot of these guys who had been interacting online in the creator space. This was the first time we got to meet each other in person, and it kind of felt like a family reunion or, high school reunion or something, where you got to see the buddies that you've made along the years and finally got to sit with them, eat with them, etc. And it was just a great time. Well, later that year, so that debate was in March, and in November I moved to Steubenville, and it was a great time. And then I thought, hey, we should do that same thing, but just explicitly get the creators together just for a good time, even if it's not a big production. Even if I literally in my head I thought it was going to be about 12 guys who's going to show up, and we were just going to hang out at the Cigar Lounge for the weekend. Literally, I was thinking weekend with the boys at the Cigar Lounge. And that was it. That's all I expected it to turn into. I went on to Eventbrite, and I made the little event and started selling tickets for $25 a pop. And that was just literally to get people. Oh, let's see here. Am I still there? Okay, cool. And that was literally just. Oh, it's all good. All good. So it was just to get people into the Cigar Lounge. So we did that, and I live in Steubenville. I regularly get to talk with Matt Fradd, or at the time I did. He doesn't live here anymore, but regularly got to talk to him, hang out. And I said, hey, Matt, you're probably going to be hanging out in the Cigar Lounge. There's going to be a bunch of creators here. You probably want to be there. Would you just mind doing a Q&A for us? You don't have to prep anything. I'm happy to pay you for your time. And he, gracious as he is, he declined that. But he said, yeah, I'll totally do it. So he agreed to do the Q&A. And I was like, awesome. That's amazing. So I kind of announced it through my little small little channels. And, that didn't get much traction. But later on, he asked, hey, Kyle, do you want me to just promote this? I'm happy to share it on my channel and Instagram and whatnot. Just make the graphic for me and I'll share it. And I was kind of blown away. It's like, oh, thanks, Matt. That'd be really cool. Well, all of a sudden after that, it exploded. I get contacted by Catholic Answers, and they say, oh, yeah, we want you to be in on this, or we want to be in on this because we think it's going to be big in a few years. And it's just, okay, all right, yeah. So Catholic Answers came. They sent a few of their guys who mostly work in the back, and then John Sorensen, the COO, he came as well. But one thing that happened in the immediate after Matt shared it was that we outgrew the Cigar Lounge, and we had to find a real venue to do this. And I reached out to the St. Paul Center. They were great. They had a brand new building. And whenever I approached them about hosting the creator conference, in their new building, their reaction was basically, oh, we had talked about doing outside events for people, but we never imagined it would happen this fast. So, but ultimately they came, and we sold out. It was a great time, and a lot of connections were made. We had some, Matt Fradd showed up, Dr. Alan Harrelson was speaking, and Mary Morgan came, and if you go to my X profile, it's in the pinned tweet. You can see all the people that were there, and it was a great time. And you can find my X profile at Catholic Kyle. That's where I am on like all social media platforms. But so
you're on our Catholic links on Twitter, on X.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. So they anyway, so it kind of turned into this actual real legitimate thing basically overnight, and we were like, okay, we need to formalize this. Well, so the primary intention before all of this is that we just want to foster friendship in the Catholic creator space, because if you've spent more than 10 minutes on Catholic X, you know what a toxic dumpster fire it is. It's so bad. People spouting off all this nonsense and just being ugly to each other.
It's so ironic. It's so ironic that you say that. I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I wanted to get this put in, because it's so ironic that you say that, because at no time have we seen that more clearly than the last couple of days since the passing of our beloved Pope. It has gone, I mean, like you said, it's toxic, but it has gone ultra toxic in that amount of time. It's really been sad.
Yeah, exactly. And, there was a late 20th century, early 21st century philosopher who once said, what's his name? Mike Tyson said, social media has made you guys way too comfortable with being disrespectful and not getting punched in the face for it. So, and I think that's I
think I've heard of him.
Yeah. No, I think he had a public appearance that was pretty high profile earlier this year. But anyway, he but there's just some wisdom behind that too. And like everybody knows that, what's better, emailing a business, calling a business, or showing up into their face and saying, I have this problem, I need you to fix it. Because when you're within strangling distance of somebody, things move a little better. And I just thought, hey, why don't we get all these creators within strangling distance to each other, or hugging distance, excuse me, and have a chance to build some real, authentic, incarnational friendships. And I think last year it was a big success. We had a lot of people who actually, I won't name them, but we had actually 2 guys show up that had a little bit of an internet beef going on shortly before the conference. And then I was talking to another one. He said, like, man, I had that guy. His face was 12 inches away from mine. We talked. We hashed it out. Before, I hated that guy's guts. Now I only have good things to say about him. And it's just like, oh, it's beautiful. I love it. And, whenever you just close that gap, things go a little better. And especially on X, we have a lot of anonymous people who just get to say all the awful things that they want, and there's no consequences. And it's just, I understand anonymity for the sake of like protecting your livelihood, for speaking the truth. But like whenever, a lot of times it becomes a shield to do wrong and not suffer consequences for it. So, but anyway, so that's kind of what we did. But then after the conference went, we kind of sat back and thought, like, okay, I understand putting out the dumpster fire, but what do we do after that? Like, okay, let's say that we build the community and we're stronger. Now what? Well, one thing that just kind of looking around and seeing things is that the Catholic Church used to be the driving force of the culture. You go to the Sistine Chapel, St. Peter's Basilica, all this beautiful art, that had the weight of the church behind it. And, these treasures are still available to us today. I mean, that centuries later, and they're still standing. And why aren't we? It seems that we let go of the reins of the culture, and the godless society did not hesitate to pick up those reins, and we see where that's taken us. So, what are we doing there? Like, what do you? I don't want to be too critical of Catholic filmmakers who are doing the best that they can with what they have. But if I asked you, hey, do you want to go see a Catholic movie? Your answer is probably going to be, yeah, sure. But it's probably coming more from a sense of obligation that, oh, it's a Catholic movie, so I probably should go see it because I need to support this art. But do I actually want to see it? Well, no, because the quality is going to be low. A lot of Catholic and Christian movies have the exact same problem as the woke movies in that they're preaching first and then the story's just kind of tacked on. And, it's like whether it's far left or preaching a good message, that's not the way to do a movie. And then, we've noticed that there's a lot of apostolates out there who are on social media and doing their best. But I mean, this is an ever evolving game. What worked 2 years ago isn't going to work today. And like, I don't want to, well, you can probably figure out who I'm talking about, but like, let's say that your primary focus is TV. Well, millennials, Zoomers, Gen Alpha, we don't watch TV. We don't pay for Dish Network or we don't pay for cable. We stream everything. So, how are you evolving in this? YouTube is kind of the primary marketplace for ideas in that we have, this is where a lot of stuff is happening. I did a poll recently on my X account and on YouTube asking where's the best evangelization happening, and on both platforms, YouTube was the number one. And and I asked, it was Facebook, X, Instagram, and YouTube, and YouTube was number one across the board. So that's where we need to come. And one thing that a lot of Catholic YouTubers make the mistake of is we get into this, we've got our small little pond and we think that the other little fish in this little pond are our competition, but that's not necessarily the case. In order to properly evangelize, we have to break out into the mainstream. Your competition isn't Matt Fradd or Trent Horn or Taylor Marshall or whatever. Your competition is Mr. Beast, Mark Rober, Ryan Trahan. These guys. You're competing for the attention of the audience. And if we're going to build the kingdom, we can't just evangelize only Catholics. While there is certainly a good part of that, guys like Matt Fradd and Trent Horn, Taylor Marshall, all these guys, they've found their niche, and for better or worse, they are they're rather influential in those circles. But really and truthfully, we need to be going out into the godless society and bringing these people in. So part of what we're doing here at Ipsum Audite is we are offering a free Discord community. So if you're on Discord, you can join in. We've got a little bit of a creator application that says that, hey, you can do that. You can come in and we're going to give you tips and you can interact in the community. We've got quite a few really active people in there, some of whom have pretty large channels. One guy in particular, he runs the channel Master Samwise. He's got like 156,000 subscribers or something like that. And, he's gotten videos that gets millions of views. And while he never outright says that he's Catholic on YouTube, all his videos are just dripping with Catholic morality. And I think we just want to equip some of this excellence back into our art form, because what is media but art? This interview, while your guest may be a little subpar, this is still artwork, right? So, so that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get people to like understand the platform and just kind of increase engagement. If I can throw any more buzzwords in there, I'll see if I can, but that's just kind of what we're doing. There.
Wow. You just threw so much good stuff out there. I don't know where to even begin to respond, but I'm going to try and tackle it from this vantage point. The thing that jumped out the most of what you said is the technology is definitely changing. The way that we got, or I remember 20 years ago, Blog Talk Radio was considered cutting edge.
Right.
They just went under. They
Yep.
went under, and the reason why they went under is because they didn't adapt. They didn't. They didn't adapt to the changes. One of the things that I have noticed is that the window of time that you have to grab someone's attention with your message is not what it used to be.
Yep.
You better get that initial open door within that 144 characters, or you're pretty much, you're out of the game.
Yep.
Because things are moving so quickly, people's attention spans are so small because they're constantly moving from this thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. And some of our media has been able to adapt and some haven't. And as a result, you get I don't want to say it's a large segment, but there is a segment of our apostolic community that's really looking for clickbait. They're really just out there trying to get clicks. And they will come out with a sensationalistic message, sensationalistic approach. And as you illustrated, it gets more and more and more toxic. We had a recent falling out with a group that, ironically, I formed in 2009. We had a falling out with them over disagreements over various things. One of them having to do with private revelation. Now, I'm a fan of private revelation as much as the next guy. I'm going this fall on a trip to Fatima and Lourdes and Rudabaugh. And so, I believe that private revelation has a place. But Kyle, we have an element within our Catholic community that elevates private revelation above public revelation, and they often elevate spurious and questionable private revelations up to that point. And that is a one element of, when you talk about the toxicity, that's one element. Another element is what I call the holier than the Pope crowd. Okay, and I'm sure you're familiar, with that group. So there is a danger of fragmentation within the Catholic community because of some of these fringe elements. How much do you see it as a role of what you're doing to kind of, I don't know, herd the cats back together in terms of, am I being clear in what I'm saying here?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I've run across the private revelation crowd where, they're always reading private revelation, and there's a practical thing to do. If you run across somebody like that, you can just simply ask, okay, the private revelation, okay, obviously nihil obstat, there's nothing offensive in this, in the church, but that's all well and good. Have you familiarized yourself very intimately with public revelation yet, though? I had a guy that I went to church with, and he was telling me about all these different private revelations that he was really into, and I asked him, have you gone cover to cover with scripture yet? And he went, well, no. And I'm like, okay, do that first, because that's actually binding to you. These things are like extra things that you can pick up if you so choose, but that doesn't mean that like you that you can't bind other people to this, because the church doesn't bind us to it. So the role that I fill in this honestly, though, is to get to know these people, become friends with them, get their cell phone number. It sounds really simple, but have their cell phone number, because, you and I have both seen very public spats between personalities, and every single one of them, I think to myself, man, how much better would this situation had gone if this person had texted this person instead of tweeting about it or making a response video about it. And, I know both of these guys well enough to know that, they don't have each other's phone numbers. I know that that's not the case. So, so what I'm wanting to do is just strengthen those bonds of fraternity, because you cannot have fraternal correction without fraternity. Everybody says, I'm offering my fraternal correction to the Pope on my Facebook page, of whom the Pope is not on. It's just okay, why are you really trying to correct, or are you just trying to essentially virtue signal? Oh, look at me, I dislike the Pope and I'm decrying this. And it's just okay, but what to what end? So yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's
it's
and
interesting that you kind of showed your hand there in a very subtle way, and I love the subtle use of language. Okay, when you talked about a private revelation that got a nil obstat, you kind of showed your hand there. The word's basically talking about the same particular private revelation that I'm not going to name, but I know we're talking about the same particular one. And I love your point. Okay, it's a nil obstat. Okay, so there's nothing egregiously, particularly objectionable about some of the messages. Okay, all right, great. But do you want to base a Catholic worldview on that? Or do you want to base a Catholic worldview on the catechism and the doctors of the church and the early church fathers, and that's what you should be basing your Catholic worldview on? And the problem that I have is, like I said, when you get into the clickbait crowd, now you got people that are actually willing to kind of bend the rules. They're willing to slander other people. They're willing to plagiarize material. They're engaging in some very uncharitable. This particular person. I'll just give you an example. This particular person intimated that I may have been in some way involved in the attempted assassination on then candidate Trump. That's how ugly this got. Okay. And that's so far out in left field, but yeah, this is the kind of toxic atmosphere that you were talking about. Where is this coming from? And we become detached from the moorings of our faith when we're allowing our minds to go into places like that, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of that just comes from just a total disconnect from reality. There's a pretty common phrase online these days called, you need to go touch some grass. And, there's so many of these things where it's just if you spent more time outside than you do staring at a screen, you wouldn't be able to even get to this point. Think about, when you and I were in high school, if some kid thought that he was a deer, well, that would just get bullied right out of him. Everybody around him tells him, that's really stupid. Don't do that. I was I'm going to go into the woods and pretend to be a deer because that's who I really am. And, and everybody's like, that's stupid. You shouldn't do that. That's ridiculous. And I'm sure everybody in the audience is going to agree with that point as well. But now you can go online and you can find an entire support group of people who think that they're a deer, and you just kind of withdraw from the community into this further and further disconnected from reality. And I can't tell you how many times, because not to name drop, but I'm pretty good friends with some pretty big names in the Catholic sphere. I've got their cell phone numbers. I communicate with them pretty regularly, and I'll see somebody online speculate on the intentions of this person. It's well, this person's just trying to do this, or, oh, well, I know the real intention is this. And it's just, one, I can tell that this person's never talked to, let's say, Matt Frad, for instance. Is like, I can tell you've never met Matt, because if you knew anything about him, you would know how ridiculous what you are saying. It's like, it's not reality. It's this is what you've got in your own head, and it's completely disconnected. And, you know, I've even had some people very early on in my YouTube career, if you want to call it that. I got involved in I made a mistake, and, you know, people were saying things about me. It's like, oh, he's just trying to do this. They're paying him. And it's just like, buddy, you don't understand how insignificant no one would pay me to do what I did. And nobody did pay me. I didn't make any money off of this. I don't know what you're talking about. So whenever they say, oh, it's just about the money, and it's just like, you know, a lot of times in those situations, it's just like, you know, you say that, oh, they did it only just for the money. And yet I can usually in those situations, that person probably lost money on that. So it's like, that's not what it was. But
kind of like the same accusation that the priest had, the stipend for the priest that does a mass for the dead.
Right.
No, it's just a money make. If you knew how little money that it, you know, it made in that type of a situation.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and, you know, we've already gotten accusations because we're doing the Catholic Creator Conference. Last year, you know, the tickets were $25 because I didn't want to raise the prices after our expenses went up. This year, they're $500. We're also doing a lot more, and, you know, I don't want to give too much inside knowledge into our books, but basically, we are on track to be a little above break even. And, you know, last year,
I'd love to go. I can't get the time off. So
yeah.
For me, the cost is not the prohibitive thing. It's
right.
getting the time off from work.
Yeah. No, and it's there have been a few people too where it's just like, hey, I can get the time, I just can't get the money. And I said, like, well, I can find money for you, I can't find your time. But and we've been able to work out some things with people, like, hey, just crowdfund with your audience, and that's worked out pretty well. We actually recently ran a successful campaign with getting a guy to go to Rome with us this summer. So that's one cool thing that the Vatican's doing for the Jubilee year is there's a Jubilee for digital missionaries and influencers. And, you know, we got kind of invited to go on that. So literally the day the conference ends, we're heading to the airport and going to Rome for this. So that's going to be a wild weekend. But yeah, no, but, like, you know, people were saying, like, oh, you're just trying to make money off of this. Is like, I'm trying to cover my expenses. Last year, it cost thousands of dollars out of my own pocket to put this on. So it's just like, no, it's not just money. It's primarily the mission. And you know what? There might be a little left over at the end, which will probably just be reinvested into next year to secure stuff and whatnot.
Yeah,
so
people don't realize, even someone on our level, I mean, we're a 501c3. People don't realize there are expenses involved. I mean, there's the legal expenses, there's the practical business expenses. And then, it's like you said, you've got to have a halfway decent microphone in order for this to sound. Yep. So there's investment there in the equipment and everything. People don't realize that it costs money. I want to revisit something you said just a minute ago, because you talked about our need to go outside of the Catholic circles into the mainstream, and I agree with you, except for one thing. When 2/3 of American Catholics don't believe in the real presence, we got a problem in our own house. And how do you feel our responsibility is, or how do you feel like we should address our responsibility to kind of clean up our own house? Because that's an incredible statistic that 2/3 of American Catholics don't even believe in the real presence.
Yeah. So we'll just take those numbers on its face and assume they're accurate. I think that this still isn't I think as creators, our job doesn't change in terms of trying to reach those people. In fact, I think that it's even more pressing that we raise our we raise our
game.
We step up our game. Yeah, exactly. We step up our game to reach those people too, because those people are not watching any Catholic creators, or if they are, they don't even realize that it is. These people are not watching Pints with Aquinas. They're not Catholic Answers, and they're not even, watching some creators that, we might even think of as a little bit more problematic. Even that would be an improvement. These guys, if they're on YouTube, they're watching Mr. Beast, they're watching, all these How Ridiculous, Dude Perfect, whatever. That's who they are watching. So we got to step up our game to start competing with them in order to reach even the people in the pew. Now, that being said, content creation isn't the only tool in our toolbox. A lot of this is going to be work done in the parish. And I'm a military man, so I'm very big on leadership. Everything rises and falls on the shoulders of leadership. So you got to have a priest that's at least supportive of the community. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that it's just all on your priest to do it. I have led events within my parish before, and I can tell you one of the best. So first thing you need to do is you need to have your priest over for dinner. Especially now that it's the Easter season. If you've been saving that bottle of whiskey or bottle of wine for a special occasion, when your priest is over at your house, that's the occasion you've been waiting for. Break it open, fix the best meal. If you got a grill, you need to make the best steak that you've ever made in your life. This is a man who has dedicated his life to bringing people back from the brink of hell and into the body of Christ. So this is the guy that, if you see a military man in uniform, you say, thank you for your service. Well, that needs to go 4 times more for the priest. Good or bad priest, because, bad priest is still a type of priest. But have him over, get him familiar with you, because if you just show up, like, especially if you're new and you just show up, it's like, hey, I want to do all this, 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 this. He's going to go, yeah, probably not, because he doesn't know you. So get to know him, invite him over. And then you can start trying to say, hey, I want to do a men's night. March 19th, that's the Feast of St. Joseph. I want to do a men's night, and I want to have, I don't want this feast day to go uncelebrated. So have these things. And, some of these guys out here that are watching this, you might have a little bit more expendable income than others. Let me give you the secret to having a successful event where you're going to have Catholics, non-Catholics alike show up. You need 2 ingredients: free food, free alcohol. Everybody will show up to it. Like, my own conversion started literally, I'm embarrassed to admit, well, not terribly embarrassed, but the tipping point for me and my conversion to finally show up to a Catholic church was a promise of free pizza. I mean, I was a stupid 16-year-old kid at the time, but still, the free pizza, I'm there. So have free food available, have free alcohol, get your beer, get your, have a couple of bottle of whiskeys out, and the men will show up. Ladies, I have no idea how to plan an event for you. You guys, y'all just have to figure it out. And if you have any ideas, let me know. But you start building this community, and maybe this guy who's been sitting in the pews, who doesn't really believe in the real presence, he shows up to this event primarily because he's interested in the free food and the free alcohol. But what he's going to find in there is fraternity and friendship. And John, he might become friends with you. And now, once you get past that surface level friendship, which is mostly just small talk, you can start talking about some of the more real important things. There is no magic wand that you can wave and then just have, I meet a stranger on the street and we immediately start talking about the real things. People on Instagram say, like, I don't want to know how the weather is. I want to know what drives you. And I'm like, well, I don't know you, so I don't want to share that with you. So you build the fraternity within the parish, and then you can start getting to the real meat and potatoes of things. And that's how we're going to do this. And as content creators, I guess it's a twofold thing. It's like, one, we can encourage, we can step up our game, start making excellent content. One of my things is that I want the next Mr. Beast to be a faithful Catholic. And we're a long ways off from that, but the biggest YouTuber on the planet needs to be Catholic, and that needs to be a huge goal of ours, and that's one of our missions. But then also, if you are a Catholic creator, mostly just speaking to Catholics, you need to encourage these types of like real life, not just online community things to strengthen everything.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can have the best, most appealing YouTube channel, and I see some that they do some really incredible things with the graphics and the presentation and the sound and all that. All that doesn't mean anything if it doesn't have the right message behind it. And the right message behind it is, and it's a fine line. It's a fine line to walk, because you don't want to get overly theological and bury someone, and you kind of see the eye roll type of thing. But by the same token, you don't want to be so shallow that you're just really, you're just mixing in with the culture. And we're not doing a good job of meeting people where they are. And there's a lot of, even in our apostolate, we run across a lot of people, Kyle, that have been through unbelievable stuff. I mean, traumas, tragedies. On the 28th, for instance, I'll give you an example. On the 28th, I'm going to be interviewing a father of one of the victims of the Parkland tragedy, the Parkland school shooting from 2018. This has become a part of our culture, this kind of senseless violence, these kinds of, and it's caused a sort of isolation. And I really believe that is one of the problems that we're facing. That's one of the obstacles that we're facing, is that the churches, a lot of the churches have taken on this image of being ivory tower, disconnected, can't identify with me and my life and the things that I'm facing and everything like that. We have an opportunity through what we're doing to reach people in a different way, but it's still that same old, like you said, fraternity, that same old personal connection. It's just done in a different way, in a different medium, right?
Yeah. Well, I had a friend talk to me once about, we went to an Institute of Christ the King oratory in St. Louis. So a big fan of the Latin Mass. And it's, he started bringing a friend with him, who was just coming out of atheism. She had a lot of trauma and everything. And my buddy, thank God, he was very protective, because he basically said, hey, you need to let me know if any of these guys gives her a hard time about something that there's no way she could know about. Because if that happens, I need to go knock some heads. And it's just like, okay, yeah, I think we can do that, because he's like, listen, our Lord speaks of, faith the size of a mustard seed, and how that can bloom into something that's, big and strong. Well, if you know anything about gardening, farming, whatever, you plant that mustard seed, but what is it first? What does the mustard seed turn into after you plant it? Well, it's just a little sproutling. Well, if you are the guy with your combat boots and you see that little sproutling and you stomp it, you could end it right there. And it's like, oh, well, the person's faith should have been stronger. It's like, well, it wasn't. So what are you going to do with that? So, and now, Mr. Holier Than Thou Latin Mass or whatever, congratulations, you just ended, or you just did serious damage to this faith journey of this person that could have become this great saint. And now you're going to be held accountable for that at your judgment. So, that's something we should just take a little bit of time to think about, and just being a little bit more gentle. I see people on X always like, well, being nice isn't a virtue. It's like, correct, nice isn't a virtue, but gentleness is in fact a fruit of the Holy Spirit. So that's something that we just have to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's not sympathy, it's empathy. It's the idea of I can identify, I can relate with your life experience and how you may have suffered in your life, let me tell you what I have discovered that has kind of helped me overcome, rather than like, I think what you're saying here is the motivation of some people is to talk down, I'm higher than you. You should respect how wise I am and how knowledgeable I am. Well, you might be the most knowledgeable Catholic in the world. You might be the most knowledgeable theologian in the world. But like you said, for the little sprout that's just trying to come out of the ground, this is a person that's trying to find their voice. This is a person that's trying to stand up after maybe, something, horrific or horrible that's happened in their life. And the old expression, I don't want to get too cliche, but people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, right?
Yep. Yeah. No, and I think one thing that I see a lot online is just what is it? We see this over intellectualizing of the faith, and it's frustrating because I see this a lot, especially like sedevacantist will do this. It's like, oh, you're just too stupid for this. And it's just like, well, Jesus came to save both the scholar and the beggar. So if the beggar is left out of your ideology, well, then that's not the faith. If Christianity was merely an intellectual venture, Satan would be the best Christian. Satan's way smarter than you. He knows apologetic arguments that we haven't even conceived of yet. He knows Christian theology. He understands the Trinity better than any of us ever will on this side of eternity. And yet, he's a terrible person. Satan, that's what we talk about, if you want to say pure evil. He's the closest thing to pure evil that could possibly exist. And he's smarter than everybody here. And yet he's still chosen to be against God. It's not just an intellectual journey. And I feel this, people find the faith and it is good, but then they want to just lord it over people. And I just can't help but think that it's a sort of sacrilege, because of all the things that you could have beat people over the head with. Why are you choosing the cross to do that? That's evil. That's sacrilegious, and you shouldn't be doing that. And once again, you will be held accountable for that at your judgment, because as one of the big brain smart people, you of all people should know better.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's kind of like the opposite of Christianity, because as we go deeper and deeper into the faith, we're supposed to, who was it? John that said, I must grow smaller as he grows larger. Mm-hmm. I must diminish and that is the paradoxical thing about our faith, is the more that we learn, the more that we read, the more we realize how much we don't know. Mm-hmm. And the old virtues of humility, obedience, kindness, empathy have been replaced, like I said, with clicks. I want to be the most, want to it's almost like there's a competition out there to say the most outrageous thing about the Holy Father, or mm-hmm. or to say that, well, I know the church says this, and this, but this private revelation over here says something different. And it's almost like Kyle, it's almost like a modern day Gnosticism, where so many people have this, I have this secret knowledge. I have this secret knowledge that nobody else has. It looks like you're reading.
Hold on, let me grab a book. The phenomenon that you're talking about, Monsignor Ronald Knox wrote an entire book on this, Enthusiasm. So basically, it's this tendency of pious people to find something and just kind of, like take this and like elevate it. And then like, obviously these people then grow in their spiritual life, and then they start thinking, okay, now everybody has to do this. And you could do this with, say, like a daily rosary, which is a beautiful, encouraged devotion. And I don't want to say that like it, I don't want to say anything bad about it, but there does become this tendency to where like I'm doing the daily rosary, I'm seeing what it's doing for me. And then you start thinking, okay, if you're not doing the daily rosary, you're a terrible person. You're not a good Catholic. Well, it's like, okay, well, that could be the case, but not necessarily. There's tons of saints who never once prayed the rosary, so it's not required of you. It is highly encouraged, but it's not required. So then it becomes from the perspective of, let's say, the enthusiast. Well, now you're saying you're as Ronald Knox uses the term, co-religionists. You're looking down on them for not doing it. And then you become a little bit more zealous. And then because you're becoming zealous, the people around you are like, whoa, dude, chill out. And then what's even more is that those outside of the church are even looking at you saying, whoa, chill out. So now to the enthusiast, the atheist, and the guy sitting next to you in the pew are saying the same thing of saying, whoa, chill out. So now you think, oh, this guy is an atheist. You know, this guy in the pew, he's saying the same thing as the atheist. That just proves that I'm right. And whenever you go into this, it usually ends in a schism, because it's just like, oh, I'm higher than this. I'm higher than all of this. And so now your good devotion, daily devotion to the rosary, which once again, still encouraged, has now led to you leaving the church. And it's not because of the rosary, it's because of your pride. So pride is by far the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins. If pride can knock Satan out of heaven, it can definitely kick you out of the church.
Not only, I would agree with you that not only is it the most dangerous of the 7, but I would go so far as to say it's more dangerous than the other 6 combined. I would go that far, because it's interesting, because the falling out that I had with this one particular apostolate that I used to belong to, that I will not name, but it all centered around that. It all started with our disagreement on this one particular private revelation, right? And it really started with fraternal correction. It started with, okay, you want to believe in this particular private revelation, or you want to put stock in this particular private revelation, you certainly have that, you certainly have that prerogative, so long as you're willing to stay in the boundaries that the church prescribes. You can't promote a private revelation that's not approved by the church. You cannot say that it's of supernatural origin if the church has not made that declaration. And you certainly, and when the church has come out and condemned certain private revelations, there's certain private revelations that the church has gone past the point of saying, this is not only not approved, this is condemned, this is a negative judgment. You're certainly not allowed to promote those. The Baysides, the Maria Divine Mercies, those. You find people that are continuing to promote these revelations that the church has said are heresy. They're condemned. And it kind of just sprouted out and out and out. And from that, and it all rooted from just this sin of pride, where a person cannot stand the idea of being corrected. You're making a mistake. You're wrong. What you're doing is incorrect. What you're doing is against the nature of the church. And if you can't be corrected, if you're not subject to being corrected, how can you ever expect to grow as a Christian? Every single one of us is subject to correction. Every single one of us is going to get it wrong at one time or another. But if you're not subject to if you let your pride take over, that's when that's when you go off the rails. And one of my favorite stories, one of my favorite saints is Saint Bernadette. And what I really love about the story of Saint Bernadette is how the world viewed her. She was ignorant, she was stupid, she was uneducated, she was a peasant, she was nobody to be listened to. And the bishop asked her, did the lady identify herself? Did she give you her name? And this 14-year-old uneducated peasant girl says, I am the Immaculate Conception. And that was just, so God uses the humble to confound the wise. And we see that over and over and over again. And you talked about our battle with the devil. And the devil is far smarter than all of us. And he's able to twist our minds in directions that we can't fathom. But there is a way to combat the devil. And the way to combat the devil, the weapon that he can't fight against, is humility. He has no answer for humility. And so to fight the devil, rather than being, I'm the proudest, I'm the biggest, I'm the, we have the best, ministry, we have the best YouTube channel. It should be just the opposite. To retreat back into, I am smaller, the church is bigger, God is bigger. And that humility, the devil can't combat.
Yeah, I believe it was St. John Vianney, but if anybody knows better, feel free to correct me, and especially in the comments. But I think it was St. John Vianney that said, you will find every virtue in hell except for humility. Atheists love, atheists hope, but you will not find humility in hell. I think it was like Satan appeared to Padre Pio and says, like, you don't have a shot at heaven. You fast, but I don't even eat. You study the faith, but I know it better than you. And his response was, yes. Oh yeah. Well, I can humble myself. And that's, and there's something that Scott Hahn has said. I don't know if he put it in a book or if this is something he tells the class, that if you go look throughout Scripture, there is this theme of God opposes the proud even when they're right. So, if you have your pride is your most useless thing in your possession, if you find an opportunity to offload some, i.e. be humiliated, you should jump at it. If somebody corrects you, you see that you're wrong, thank them. That was probably one of the most valuable lessons that I picked up whenever I was in the Air Force, because, one thing in the military is that our uniform requirements are very, very strict. And it's really easy to just miss a small detail, like the buttons on your back pocket. If you put your wallet in, you might have forgotten to button those buttons. Okay, that's fine. If you see that, like, hey, hey sir, your buttons are unbuttoned. Oh, so you got two options there. One, you can give them the finger and say, mind your own business, or you can say, oh, I didn't realize, thank you. And you just thank them for the correction and you move on. You correct it, and now you're both better off. And and I did a few things like that where I would correct some strangers, or you see a guy walking around without his hat on, and it's just like, or he's got his hat on inside or something like that. And what are you going to do? Well, it's like, hey, sir, you forgot your hat. Oh, my bad, dude. Or, yeah, I'm heading to the store right now to pick one up. I don't know where it's at. Whatever. That I don't know. It's just a simple thing. There's nothing inherently evil about being wrong if your ignorance is genuine, but there is something wrong with bucking the correction if it's been offered to you. And I think humility, especially in the creator space, because it's so easy to get your head inflated with all of this. And this is something my business partner Drew, he runs the channel Drew the Catholic, is really big on, is that, we need to really think of ourselves as digital missionaries. And let's say, you were a missionary somewhere out in Africa or something like that. There's a very real danger to your physical person in this. If you make a wrong step, or if you offend somebody, or if you don't act right, you could be killed. Praise God, that could be a martyrdom. So you know what? Yep, they're going to cut your head off because you refuse to renounce the faith, and praise the Lord, there's another saint in heaven. But because of that, you're a lot more careful, because in some parts of the world where you're on mission, you wake up each morning knowing that this day could be your last. So, you do that. But here online, today's probably not my last day. It's probably not yours either. There's a reasonable hope that you're going to live to see tomorrow. If you need to go to confession, chances are you're going to be able to do it on Saturday. But the spiritual danger is off the charts, because it's a lot more subtle. It's a lot easier to be right with God when you know that there's a knife to your throat, or there could be a knife to your throat at any day. Whenever it's just like, oh, okay, if I do this, I'm going to get some rude comments, or I'm going to get some heat on this, or whatever. It's like, I can kind of do what I want. There's no real danger. And that's actually the spiritual danger, which I think is it's far easier and far more dangerous. So, but anyway, that's what I have on that.
I think it's far more dangerous because it's far more subtle and easy to miss. It's not easy to miss a knife to your throat. The message is pretty clear. But you're right in one respect that it is far more dangerous, and the reason it's far more dangerous is because it carries with it the sin of scandal. Because if I set a bad example, then, like you said, the people on the outside are watching that. The people on the outside are pointing to that. See how those Catholics are? And you see this kind of poking the bear tactic online all the time. If you're in any kind of a public forum, a faith forum, or whatever, the Catholics are prey. They're attacked day in, day out. When somebody throws, well, Ephesians 2:8-9. Oh, I've never seen those two verses before. It's not, you know what I'm saying? The same arguments over and over and over again. And you realize that the number of people who are willing to actually engage in a serious dialogue on these things is very small. Most of them want to throw stones. They want to throw stones. Well, when you respond in an uncharitable way, all you're doing is feeding into that game. You're feeding into the caricature they're making of Catholics as intolerant, full of hate, not full of the Spirit, all of these things. And it is the sin of scandal. And it is a very delicate balance to correct. No, your argument is wrong because of this, and this, but still be charitable. And I have a friend who grew up a Protestant, and he is on the brink of, he's told me he's on the brink of converting to the faith, largely because of the arguments that I have presented to him. But I wanted to let you know that the interesting thing is the thing that kind of opened the door is in my discussions with him. He just basically asked me, okay, well, what is your biggest argument for Catholicism? What would say your biggest argument for Catholicism is this? Well, it makes sense of suffering. And that was kind of opening the door, because if our works and our sufferings don't have any value, well, God is just mean then. It's just, if our suffering is just gratuitous, it doesn't have any value, it doesn't have any purpose, then God is making us suffer for his own entertainment value, I guess, is what you would be the implication you draw from that. But it's kind of interesting because that is one of the vantage points that people don't want to go into. They want to, and the prosperity gospel has kind of risen out of this, is that everybody wants to talk about faith as if it's, God is like a genie that grants us our wishes and will promises us happiness and everything like that. Sometimes real, genuine faith doesn't look anything like that. And that's an opportunity for us to make a connection with people who are suffering, who are going through trials, to know, okay, your suffering is not in vain. It's not worthless. It does not have no value. It can actually be used as an evangelism tool. And how this all ties into this larger conversation that we're having about pride is, too often, Kyle, I see people, well, you need to pull up yourself by your bootstraps and stop feeling sorry for yourself. And, again, that lack of empathy. And if you don't have any empathy, if you don't have any sympathy for the downtrodden and the suffering and the marginalized, you're not radiating Christ.
Yeah. If that person's not feeling the love of God coming from you, chances are you're doing something wrong. It's that's the entire thing. Like, what are we trying to do here? It's like, we're trying to bring the love of God to the people. And sometimes that looks, from the outside, sometimes that looks harsh. You probably shouldn't be doing that with a stranger, though. Because, I mean, if somebody's rude to me, like I've read a lot of internet comments. I used to be Trent Horn's assistant. I read a lot of things, and I can tell you, the moment that I start seeing accusations, insults, or whatever, I stop reading the comment. Some people will write these big walls of texts in the comment section. It's just like, you're just trying to, and I have no idea what he said after that, because I've already moved on. Because it's just like, nope, I'm not interested in the accuser. I have the Redeemer. So that's something that, like, we need to keep in mind whenever we're doing this. Instead of just insulting Protestants, instead of saying like, oh, you're not Catholic because you just don't like the idea of somebody being above you. It's like, well, there might be some truth to that, but also, if you don't know that person well enough, one, there's no way that you could even know that that's the case. And two, you don't know if you just struck a chord and now you've just made them dig in their heels a little bit harder. So yeah, there's so much that we do, but you can do all this angry nonsense all you want, and you will get clicks. You will grow a following doing that. But are you bringing the love of Christ to these people? Yeah.
You just touched a nerve there, because it has been my experience, especially with the person that I was telling you about this. It's been my experience, maybe not all, that there are the prideful person out there. There is the person that's just trying to find an easy way to heaven. Okay. But I would have to know the person's heart to know who that person is. And God didn't give me that knowledge. Okay. But there is also the person whose heart is in the right place, who does want to love God with their whole heart, who is the victim of maybe some disordered arguments that they've heard in the past, that have kind of twisted logic around in order to make an incorrect doctrine appear appealing, appear correct, just because of the way that it was worded to them. And if you can get in that person's inner circle, you can frame an argument to that person in such a way that they have to look at you and say, I never really saw it that way. So I want to give you one perfect personal example of what I'm talking about. A Protestant said, I have an honest question for you. And I said, okay. He said, I just want to know, I just understand why you pray to Mary. And I said, okay. I said, I guess you kind of see that as a form of worship, right? And he said, yeah, I got to be honest, I do. I said, okay, all right, fair enough. I said, so let me unpack this for you. So I start talking to him about the idea of typology. And I start talking about the Exodus when they took the hyssop branch and they put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost and on the lintel,
Mhm.
made the shape of the cross. And I said, what is that a typology of? What is that pointing forward to? He said, oh, well, that's clearly pointing forward to the person of Christ. I said, exactly. I said, that is a typology. So, well, Catholics, we're big believers in typology in the Old Testament. I said, so let me give you an example. I said, Adonijah, who was the brother of the king, approaches the queen. Now, in the Old Testament, the queen was the mother of the king, not the wife. So he approaches the queen, who is his mother, and the king's mother. And then I'm breaking this right down from him from 1 Kings chapter 2. And I said, so Adonijah approaches the queen mother and makes a request, and the queen mother goes into the chamber of the king, and the king bows down before her, a bow of respect, not a bow of worship, has a throne placed to his right hand for his mother to sit upon. And I go through the whole story, and I said, so the queen mother was an intercessor before the king, right? He said, okay, but what does that have to do with Mary? I said, I'm getting to that. And I could kind of see as I'm working through this, Kyle, that he had never made the connection. He never had the opportunity to make the connection. I said, so when the angel Gabriel appears to Mary, what does he say to her? Well, it says that she would have a son, and her son would be the Son of God. I said, yeah, but what else does he say? He says, your son will sit on the throne of David, his father. Okay. And he said, okay. I said, so Jesus is the Davidic king. And he said, okay. He said, I'll buy that. And then I just looked at him and said, well, then who is the queen mother? And Kyle, I've known this guy for 40 years. I saw an expression on his face that I've never seen before. And he was silent for one of the few times that I've known he was silent. He had never heard an argument like that. And you could see that it had an impact. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because how many times will if we just get the opportunity, if we just get inside the person's inner circle, forming that relationship first that you talked about, now we have the opportunity to present the case for Catholicism in a way that we've never had the opportunity. But if we, on the other hand, if we do like you say, if we stomp down in our boots on the little sprout just as it's trying to come out of the ground, we never get that opportunity.
Right. And what's worse is you might prevent anybody else from having that opportunity now because you've put such a sour taste in their mouth. They might want nothing to do with Catholics. So yeah, so it's very, very, very there is one point that I want to make about how we go about things, because I see this on Twitter all the time, and that it's people assume the worst out of, I might say something a little ambiguous and people will just assume the worst about what I possibly meant at that. It's straight from the Catechism. It's paragraph 2478, and the way that I remember this is that you got to think. Whenever you're online and you're interacting with people, you got to be thinking of this 24/7, 8 days a week. So CCC 2478. To avoid rash judgment, everyone should be careful to interpret insofar as possible his neighbor's thoughts, words, and deeds in a favorable way. And then it has a quote from St. Ignatius of Loyola. Every good Christian ought to be more ready to give a favorable interpretation to another statement than to condemn it. But if he cannot do so, let him ask how the other understands it. And if the latter understands it badly, let the former correct him with love. If that does not suffice, let the Christian try all suitable ways to bring the other to a correct interpretation so that he may be saved. So it's not saying like, oh, don't ever do don't ever do fraternal correction. But the first thing that you do is that you ask, like, hey, what did you mean by that? What do you mean by this? Because if you don't understand somebody, how on earth could you possibly correct them? I can't tell you how many times where I've had people get all high and mighty with me. It's like, well, this is actually the truth, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. You know, I perhaps I'm a poor writer, and that's not what I didn't communicate that clearly. At which point, like, I accept that criticism. But if you're saying like, oh, you're a heretic for saying this, and it's like, no, I'm not a heretic. I'm just a bad writer. And, you know, so that's why it's really important to ask people's understanding. And the beautiful thing with Protestants, and this is why I think we've had so much success in converting a lot of Protestants, is that their love for Scripture is unquestionable. You know, if you can prove it from Scripture, they're on board, which is exactly what you did in your situation.
Yeah, and then I went further with the same individual.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because again, when you're willing to do this charitably, you can kind of take their arguments or their understandings to their logical conclusion, unroll it, take it to its logical conclusion, and then show them why it doesn't add up. Or where there may be a cognitive dissonance that they're not even aware of, where they're trying to hold two different views in their mind at the same time, and they're not even aware that they're doing it. I'll give you an example. The same individual. So his name was Jim. And I said, so Jim, I said, let me ask you just a straightforward question. Tell me what I must do to be saved. Under your understanding, tell me what I must do to be saved. He said, well, you have to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. That was the first thing that I seized on. I said, yes, Lord and Savior, not just Savior on you. Too many people are trying to get fire insurance. They want to have they want to have Jesus as Savior only, but they don't want him as Lord. It's a package deal. I said, would you agree with that? He said, yeah, I can agree with that. I said, okay. All right. I said, but Jim, tell me what I must accept about him. Can I accept that Jesus was really a super nice guy who said a lot of really smart things? Is that enough? He said, well, no, really. Well, what must I accept? He said, well, you have to accept him for who he is. I said, well, who is that? He said, well, he's God. He is? He said, yeah. I said, so Jim, are you saying that I have to assent to Jesus' divinity in order to worship him? Is that what you're telling me? And he said, well, yes, of course. Interesting. Because I don't assent to Mary's divinity, and yet you accuse me of worshiping her. Why the double standard? And again, I got that blank stare on his face because nobody had presented it to him, and he saw the inherent contradiction in his own position that he had never seen before. That, you know, well, he had just been conditioned to believe that Catholics worship Mary, but he had never really examined what is worship. Never gone deep enough into his own theology to examine what is worship. And again, not to keep emphasizing the point over and over again, but unless we have that charity and that compassion and that fraternity, never get the opportunity for the conversation to progress that far, right?
Right. Yeah. And, you know, there might be a few people out there that you could probably get to with just raw intellectual power, but I've known quite a few people that come to the Catholic position through just merely raw intellectual power. And those guys typically don't stay in the church for very long. So it's just like, this is not just that it's not merely intellectual. So, you know, you got to have love, you got to have faith. Faith, hope, and charity. So, of which, you know, charity is the top one, because there's no faith and there's no hope in heaven, because both of those have been fulfilled. So, but there will always be charity. So
you really can't truly get a grasp on how much our Savior loves us until you really get a grasp on how much that he identified with us in our suffering. And one of the biggest, I'm sure that you've read multiple, Catholic classics, a lot of the books, a lot of the classics I can see behind you. You have quite a few volumes there. If you had to name one that really impacted you, and you can only name one, which one would you what would be your go-to?
Of the classics, probably The Imitation of Christ by Blessed Thomas à Kempis. That one impacted me quite a lot. And then, oh my goodness, I am blanking on the name, but it's the little one, the little short. It's almost a pamphlet from Saint Alphonsus Liguori. Oh my goodness. The Uniformity with God's Will. There we go. Those probably, both of them are very well. The Imitation of Christ is a little bit heavy, but Uniformity with God's Will is, it's like a 45-minute audiobook, and I'm sure you can find it on free if you find it for free if you're like a Spotify premium member. But The Imitation of Christ, though, really, I picked that up in a time in my life where I thought, man, I've really got this Catholic thing down, and I'm doing really good. And man, it's like I'm going to be on the track to sainthood. Yeah, let's go. Then I read The Imitation of Christ, and it's like, oh my gosh, I don't even have the basics down. Oh my goodness, this was getting smacked down by, yeah.
Yep. I've read that, and it had a huge impact on me.
Yeah. Yeah, and
the one that, as a friend of mine used to the expression to the head, the one that impacted me the most was Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross.
Yeah,
that book had a huge impact on me, and the thing that impacted me the most, because Kyle, I remember as a young man, I remember in my early age, when I was a teenager, when I was a young man, one of the theological things that I wrestled with, I accepted it on faith, but I wrestled with it in terms of understanding it, was how Jesus could cry out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because I'm trying to wrestle with it as a theological, okay, Jesus is God. How can God cry out from the cross that he's abandoned by God? And I remember I had a lot of difficulty with that. And St. John of the Cross explains how in some deep, mysterious way, Jesus veiled his divinity in some way in order to totally immerse himself in the suffering of humanity, so that he could relate to that deep suffering, that deep, soulful suffering of feeling that you've been abandoned by God. And if you've never been to that place in your life, it's dark. It's a dark place. It's a lonely place.
Yeah.
And after some particularly catastrophic things that happened in my life with my family, I was there, and I understand what that's like. And St. John of the Cross says that when you're in that deep, dark suffering where you feel that you're abandoned by God, he's with you in that moment, and he's actually closest to you. That's the moment when he's the closest to you.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was boom. That was just like, what kind of God do we serve? It just took my faith to just, he's so much bigger than we can even try to contemplate. Christ is so much bigger than we imagined, and his love for us is so much bigger than we imagined. and you just you can't help but be small in that moment. You can't help but be humble in that moment and realize it's impossible for me to grasp the love of Christ. I can understand it to a level where I can articulate it to somebody else and try and explain it to somebody else, but comprehending it, it's beyond us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's beautiful. Yeah, I haven't gotten around to reading that one yet, but it's on the list. You used to say, like, I've got a bunch of books behind me. I was like, yes, well, buying books and reading books are two separate hobbies.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you say that, because when I was 12 years old, I was in a sledding accident. I was almost killed in a sledding accident. I had a severe head injury, and one of the results of that injury is I developed what's called an nystagmus with my eyes. I don't know if you ever heard that term before, but it causes the eyes to do this when something moves out of the field of vision. And the result of that is I had difficulty reading, because your eyes move back and forth across the page. And after, reading something that was, long, I would start to get headaches. I would start to develop headaches from the eye movement. Around about 2020, 2021, for some reason, that phenomenon vanished. And I was able to pick up books and read them. So what do? I jump right into St. John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul, the entire works of Anne Catherine Emmerich, the diary of, like I said, Anne Catherine Emmerich, Diary of St. Faustina, the 4-volume Mystical City of God, Maria of the Gra- I mean, big books, big. So I went from one extreme to the other. But like I said, of all the ones that I've read, and there's been quite a few, St. John of the Cross impacted me the most.
Nice. It's beautiful. Yeah. Well, where do you want to go next?
What are some of your other favorite saints? I'd just be interested in.
Ooh, St. Francis de Sales. St. Francis de Sales has. I don't want to criticize St. Joseph at all. He's my confirmation saint. But if I could go back and choose a different confirmation saint, it would probably be St. Francis de Sales. His imprint over my life, looking back, is quite apparent. Because, well, one, I was born on his feast day of January 24th. And, I was converted. I developed a love for apologetics, specifically in the context of contra Protestantism. And that was also one of his primary fields of interest as well. So, and then the place where I really, really started to take my faith seriously was St. Francis de Sales Oratory in St. Louis, which is arguably the most beautiful church in the country. And if you're ever in St. Louis, be sure to stop in. Tell the rector, Canon Coggeshall, that Kyle said hi. Yeah, and then I read, as far as apologetics go, if you're going to be doing Protestant apologetics, you need to read the Catholic Controversy. That is, I think that's just kind of a baseline. Start there and move on. But St. Francis de Sales is by far one of my favorites. Another one is going to be St. Benedict. The monastic tradition is something that I absolutely love. Kind of fell in love with St. Benedict at Clear Creek Abbey in Oklahoma, which is a little piece of heaven here on earth. It's wonderful. If you ever get a chance to go, especially as a man, the suggested donation to stay with them is $50 a night, and they feed you while you're there. And and it's wonderful. You get to pray with the monks. If you want, you can work with the monks. I took 2 friends there, both of whom eventually became Catholic. And one of them in particular said that it was his trip to Clear Creek Abbey where he made the decision that, because he was kind of on the fence between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and it was at Clear Creek Abbey that he was just overwhelmed with a sense of peace, and he's just like, okay, this is home. I need to become Catholic. And then, praise God, like the following Easter Vigil, he did. So, so St. Benedict is awesome because just revitalizing the monastic tradition in the West has been amazing. And, I think that especially with like the Our Lady of Fontgombeau communities, such as Clear Creek Abbey, they're starting to see quite a bit of growth. So I'm excited to see that. And then St. Peter. St. Peter was I won't go into the details of this, but we had an encounter with St. Peter whenever it came to the Catholic Creator Conference, and it was quite shocking to me, because this was the first time in my life that I realized that St. Peter was more than just an apologetic point, and that he's a saint in heaven who's still alive, who's still interceding for the church. And we didn't choose to make him the patron saint of our efforts. He kind of invited himself, and I'm not going to turn him away. So, I guess those St. Francis of Sales, St. Benedict, St. Peter. Those are probably the top three for me.
Well, this fall I'm going to have at least somewhat of an encounter with 16 different saints.
Beautiful.
In my pilgrimage that I'm going through in Portugal, Spain, and France. I'm going to visit the tomb of St. Thomas Aquinas, for example, St. Teresa of Lisieux, Teresa of Avila, John of Avila, John of the Cross, Anthony of Padua, St. Bernadette, St. Catherine Labouré, St. Vincent de Paul, just so many. It's a treasure trove of saints that we have to draw on, and everyone can choose their own little favorites. It's like what you said earlier today about the devotions. One size doesn't have to fit all.
Right.
So I want to close by, I want you to tell our audience, give us all the details on how we can become involved with the network, with your group, the services that you offer, how that we can partner up and take advantage of everything that you do to help us to grow. I know you did mention that one of the people that you're involved with was Swansona, and he was on our...
Yeah, Swan's a very good friend.
Yeah, we interviewed him just a couple of weeks ago. He was on this.
Wonderful.
This program just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, he's a brain trust. He really is.
Yep. No, next month I'll actually be heading to his graduation at Harvard. So pray for him as he continues his journey.
He is, and amazingly, for as brilliant as he is, amazingly humble person too. So go give us all the details on how we can network, how we can connect with you, and all of the different things you offer.
Yeah, a couple of different ways. So in order to get into the Discord server, so Discord is an app that was primarily used for video game chats and stuff like that. But if you're familiar with Slack, which is a corporate app that a lot of people use, it's pretty similar to Slack. But we have a Discord community. It's free to join. You can either go to ipsumaudite.com and you will find you'll find the link to join the Discord there, or you can go to catholiccreatorconference.com. We also have the link to join there. There's an application that you need to fill out to prove yourself as a creator, because while we do have a section for aspiring creators, it's not as robust. But if, like yourself, if you are already out here engaging, you need some help, you can come in, join, and it's free to join. I don't want to let too much out of the bag, but we do have some like paid services that are in the works right now. So we do hope to turn this into a business. And one of our missions is that we want to empower Catholic creators to do this type of work full time, because Mr. Beast didn't get to where he is by doing his thing on the side. He did it by devoting himself to it. So if we want to compete with that, we got to get on that same level. And part of that, you know what? Hopes and prayers don't put food on the table. They can lead to that, but that's not what does it. People need to get paid for their work. And, a lot of this stuff, content creation, it's a lot of work. And for most of us, for not a lot of money. So we want to try to empower people to do that. And we'll have classes and courses available for that at a later date. We haven't developed those yet, but those are in the works. But yeah, CatholicCreatorConference.com, ipsumaudite.com. And you can join the Discord, get in there, get verified, and yeah, we'd love to have anybody there. Right now, we haven't strictly restricted it to only Catholic creators. We have a few Protestant creators in there, it's just good interaction stuff. But yeah, so if you want to get involved, do that. And you can follow me. I'm mostly active on X these days, so just follow me at Catholic Kyle. And yeah, if anything else, just feel free to reach out and ask questions. I'm pretty easy to access.
Thank you. I just want to make one last point, amplifying off of something you said. People are devoting their lives to this, and people are putting a lot of creative effort and time. When people plagiarize other people's stuff, if Kyle puts out something that is, he writes an article that engages you or inspires you in some way. Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure you don't have any problem with somebody citing a paragraph and saying, "Hey, Kyle Whittington said this earlier today." And quote the paragraph and say, for a link to the full article, here it is off of his website, sure, giving proper citation, what have you. But when people copy and paste an entire article along with images and everything, slap their own name in front of it and make it look like they created it, that's just wrong.
It's theft and deception.
Thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal.
Yep.
You're taking money away from, like you said, people are doing or trying to, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to the point where eventually, we're doing this full time. We know it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort in order to do that, but plagiarism is just not something that Catholics should be doing. And I just wanted to, get that public statement out there.
Yeah.
Well, God bless you. You've been very generous with your time.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Plagiarism is definitely bad, although I would like to draw the distinction between plagiarism and inspiration. If I write something that inspires you to build off on that idea, go for it. But obviously, especially on YouTube, what you'll see is people just posting clips from other people and not crediting it. And it's just guys, don't do that. Also, it's a good way to get yourself banned off of YouTube. But anyway, yeah, that's all I have.
All right. Kyle, you've been very, very generous with your time. I know we kind of went over, and I want to thank you very much. And we will be connecting with you, and you've given me a lot of great inspiration, a lot of great ideas. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Of course. All right. Thanks, John.